Okay, so we are ready to begin now. So let us start with doing the homage to the Buddha, 3 times homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Sutta study class conducted here at WorldVen Monastery from my own room in Taishu Hermitage.
Good morning, dear Bante.
Yes, please, please. No need to speak unless there's a question. Okay, so we're resuming our reading of the Anguttara Nikaya, the Book of the Fours. And I come now to Sutta number 42. And this is very important, especially for those who are responsible for teaching the Dharma. And that is to know the right way to answer questions. Because we could see if we read the Nikayas, the discourses of the Buddha, we see that so many of the discourses either originate with somebody coming to the Buddha and asking a question, or they take the shape, form, as a series of questions that somebody directs to the Buddha, and then the Buddha answers those questions one after another. And so that is the way the teaching unfolded, from the Buddha's time through the centuries. It's almost the sort of motivation, the driving force behind the history of Buddhism is the way questions arise and new answers are formulated to deal with those questions. And even for those of us who have the responsibility of teaching the Dharma, often people come with many, many different questions, and we have to know how to treat these questions, how to answer them properly, since not every question can be answered directly in a straightforward way, but sometimes we have to take a roundabout approach to answering the questions. And so in this sutta, the Buddha lays down 4 ways of answering questions. So the word for a question in Pali is panha. Yeah, so the word for a question is panha. And if I could be excused for a play on words, it's by asking questions, asking good questions, that one acquires wisdom. And wisdom in Pali is panya. So if you don't ask questions and you just sit back and just listen to everything, listen with a wandering mind, but just sit back passively, then you don't get the chance to develop panya. So if you want to develop panya, wisdom, it's useful when questions arise in the mind to ask those questions. We could say that the questions arise from vimangsa. Vimangsa means investigation or inquiry. So one looks into the Dhamma, one investigates the Dhamma. When one investigates the Dhamma, some people maybe will be able to understand everything at a glance, but most people, questions will arise. And when the questions arise, then we have to find a way to settle those questions, to answer them, either by doing our own research or by approaching knowledgeable specialists in the Dhamma and asking the questions. And from asking the questions and getting the answers and reflecting on the answers, wisdom will arise. And so sometimes we speak about the way that wisdom arises is through sutta, which means listening or study of the Dhamma. And study gives rise to chinta, is reflection, examination, investigation. And it's in that stage that one asks the questions. And then out of investigation, then one practices meditation, bhavana, which actually means mental development, cultivation of the mind. And out of that cultivation comes true panya or wisdom. Okay, so in this sutta, the Buddha speaks very simply. He just mentions the general ways of answering questions. But we'll try to give some examples of the different types of answers, the different questions and the different types of answers. So the first is the most obvious. So this is a question to be answered categorically. So the Pali word here is ekangsa vyakaraniyo, or vyakaraniyo. So these are the three types. Actually, I just realized that. Actually, this should be panha, not panha. Okay, so a kangsa, so vyakaraniyo means to be answered. And this is categorically, definitively. So it's eka, which means one, plus angsa. The original sense of angsa is a shoulder, but then it comes to mean an aspect of something. So this is a question in which there's just one direct way to answer that question, either yes or no. Okay, so somebody asks, are all, according to Buddhism, are all conditioned things impermanent? And what is the answer to this?
Yeah. Yes.
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 Yes. There's no beating around the bush, no yes, but, no qualifications, but according to the Buddha, whatever arises by its very nature must pass away. So all conditioned things are inherently, intrinsically, necessarily, invariably impermanent. Okay, let's say, does the Noble Eightfold Path lead to liberation? Okay, maybe
Yes,
I,
Bhante.
yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so maybe we're not yet in a position to answer that on the basis of our own experience, our own realization, but drawing upon the text, the Buddha says that this is the straight path, the direct path. If you follow this path, it will lead to Nibbana, to the extinction of suffering. So we could say, yes, the Noble Eightfold Path is the direct path. It leads to liberation. Okay, another question. Do we reap the results of our own karma, our own volitional actions?
Yes.
Yes, the Buddha says that this is one of the themes for reflection every day, that I am the heir to my karma. I have the karma as my own. Whatever deeds I do, good or bad, of those deeds I will be the heir. Okay, so these are some questions that can be answered simply, categorically, directly. Okay, now a more difficult type of question. These are questions that are to be answered by making a distinction. Here the Pali word is vibhajja. Vibhajja comes from the verb vibhajati, and vibhajati means to divide up. In other words, in this case, we distinguish that the question can't be answered just in a straightforward way, but we have to make a distinction in our answer. So I tried to come up with some examples of this type of question. So I said earlier, we asked, are we responsible for the results of our karma? That is a question to be answered categorically, definitively. Yes, we reap the results of our good and bad deeds. But now I ask the question, does all karma produce its results? Do we reap the results of every karma that we've done, every volitional action? What is the answer to that?
Oh, have to wait for the condition to arise, the right condition.
Okay, very good. That's very good. If we perform a karma, and if that karma meets the right conditions, then it will ripen. If it doesn't meet the right conditions, that karma can become defunct. It can become extinguished. It's a little bit like seeds. So we might have a bag of seeds for flowers or vegetables. So if I sow those seeds in good soil and they get enough water, then those seeds will sprout and bring forth the flowers or the vegetables. But if the seeds are planted in bad soil and don't get water, the seed can wither and die and never sprout. And so karma is the same way. Even though in a general sense, we say that we're responsible for all of our karma, and we reap the results of our karma, but it doesn't mean that every karma that we do, every action will inevitably produce its fruits, its results. Those karmas that meet the conditions for ripening will ripen. Those that don't meet the conditions will become defunct. Yeah, I'll only take questions later, so you could just wait patiently till we go through the 4 types of questions. Okay, another question that people often ask, and I've dealt with this myself, is bad health or illness the result of bad karma in the past? And this is where I have to speculate on the answer. And I would say that in some cases, poor health can be the result of bad karma done in the past. But in other cases, poor health can result from bad diet, not eating the proper food, from bad environmental conditions, if one is living in a polluted, contaminated environment where there's a lot of air pollution, contaminated water, if one doesn't get sufficient exercise. So I'd say in answering the question, is poor health the result of bad karma? I would say we have to make a distinction here. In some cases, bad health is the result of poor health as a result of unwholesome karma. In other cases, poor health is the result of other conditions. Okay, another question, is all charity, all giving good, worthy, and wholesome? So you might think, charity is always good. But what about, say, on the internet, there are terrorist organizations and these extreme white supremacist groups and neo-fascist groups who also solicit donations. And so is it good to give to those groups? We would say no. Is it good to give to charities that are maybe providing food assistance to hungry people, healthcare to people suffering from illnesses, that are working to protect the natural environment, is supporting good religious causes, giving to monasteries and temples where the monastics are upholding the proper way of life. In that case, charity is good. So even with that question, we have to answer by making a distinction. Practicing charity to organizations that aim at harm and destruction, that is not good. But practicing charity towards organizations that are performing beneficial services is good. Another question, where we have to make a distinction, are all views to be discarded? This is a kind of assertion that sometimes comes out from contemporary, maybe you call these neo-Buddhist circles. They say that all views, all opinions are distractions, disturbances. Get rid of all views, all opinions, and then you'll experience the true freedom of mind. And there's even a collection of Buddhist texts in the Sutta Nipata called the Atthakavagga, the Book of the Eights, which, if we take some of those suttas in isolation, they speak about the sage, the muni, as one who has gone beyond all views, who has discarded all views. And so if we just take those suttas out of context, then we might answer to the question, are all views to be discarded? We might think the answer is simply yes, get rid of all views. But if we take the Buddha's teaching in a broader way, Then we could look at many other suttas. We could say that the Buddha says that there are some views that are to be discarded. Those will be the speculative views or the wrong views, like the view that there's no life beyond the present one, that at death everything comes to an end, and so there's no results to good and bad deeds, or the views that are purely conjectural, like whether the world is eternal, not eternal, whether the world is infinite or finite. So those kinds of views are to be discarded. But right view, the understanding of karma and its fruit, the understanding of the three characteristics, the understanding of the Four Noble Truths, and so on, those views, even if we don't see and realize them for ourselves, but those views are not to be discarded, but those views are to be used as guides to our practice, to our cultivation. Because those are the views that encourage us to give up the unwholesome, to cultivate the wholesome, and to practice the stages of the Noble Eightfold Path. Okay, another question where a distinction is to be made is the monastic life better than the household life? Here you might think, because the Buddha established a monastic order, you might think that based on the Buddha's texts, one could answer that question categorically and say, yes, the monastic life is better than the household life. But there's actually a sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya where the Buddha is in conversation with a Brahmin, and the Brahmin holds, or he's quoting the Brahmins, and the Brahmins say that the householder is living the good life, whereas the monastic, the renunciant, is not living the good life. And then he asks, what does the Buddha, what do you say about this? And then the Buddha says, I am one who speaks by making a distinction. And he uses the expression, vibhajya vado ahang. He says, I am a speaker who makes distinctions. And then he goes on to say that I do not praise wrong practice on the part of a householder and on the part of a monastic. For whether it's a householder or a monastic, if they are practicing wrongly, then I do not praise them. But whether it's a monastic or a householder, if they're practicing rightly, then I praise them. Okay, so those are a few examples of types of questions to be answered by making a distinction. Okay, then we come to a question which is to be answered with a counter question. Let me see if we could come up with some examples of these. Okay, somebody says to me, asks me, do Buddhists believe in reincarnation? they say Buddhists believe in reincarnation, right? Then I wouldn't answer that question directly. I could answer it by making a distinction, but I might choose instead to answer by asking the counter question. What do you mean by reincarnation? So if the person says, well, the way I understand reincarnation, there is a soul that remains ever the same and that inhabits the body. And so the body, at death, the body perishes, but the soul goes on and takes on a new body. Don't Buddhists believe in that? Then I would have to say, no, that is not the Buddhist conception of reincarnation. So here's where we make the distinction. We say there's one understanding of reincarnation is that there is a soul that remains the same and passes on from life to life. That is rejected by the Buddha. But what the Buddha teaches is that there is a process of rebirth whereby consciousness is ever renewed, beginning a new cycle of birth, old age, and death, but without a persisting soul underlying the process. So that is answering the question with the counter question. Do Buddhists believe in God? Then I have to answer with the counter question. What do you mean by God? So if the person says that there is a supreme being who creates the universe and rules the world, then I have to say, no, Buddhism doesn't believe in God in that sense. But then if they say, well, by God, I understand a being that's superior to the human being, that has great power, splendor, long lifespan, then I say, yes, Buddhism believes in that kind of God, but not just one, but many, many gods like that. Those are the beings we call the Devas and the Brahmas. Okay, so those are some questions to be answered with a counter question. Usually the best counter question is simply to ask, when somebody's question is a little bit vague about the intention, you ask, what do you mean? Because you want to get the terms of the question precisely explicated, to make the terms of the question clear and explicit. Then you could answer the question. Okay, then the fourth type of question is the question to be put aside, to be set aside. So in the Buddha's time, there was a group of 10 philosophical questions that were always being debated by the different ascetics and religious leaders and philosophers, that the Buddhas, often they would come to the Buddha and ask him, they would ask the Buddha these questions, and the Buddha would say, I don't address that question. So these are the questions. Is the world eternal or not eternal? Is the world infinite or finite? Is the soul the same as the body, or is the soul distinct from the body? And then the fourth, there are four alternatives. Does the enlightened one exist after death? Does the enlightened one not exist after death? Does the enlightened one both exist after death and not exist after death? Or does the enlightened one neither exist nor not exist after death? So those are the 10 speculative questions that the Buddha set aside in his time. Maybe we could think of many other questions that arise in our time that I would put aside, sometimes simply because the question is not within my sphere of competence. Like sometimes somebody will ask me, well, what is the Buddhist perspective on quantum mechanics? And when I'm asked that question, I have to say, well, I have a very vague knowledge about quantum mechanics, but I don't know enough to answer in any detail. So I put that question aside. Okay, so those are the 4 ways of answering questions. And let's see if what the verse says. So the first verse just goes through the 4 types of answers. So one kind you answer categorically, another you make a distinction, the third you raise a counter question, the fourth should be set aside. So when a monk knows how to answer each type of question in the appropriate way, they say that he is skilled in the 4 kinds of questions. He is hard to attack, hard to defeat, deep, hard to assault. He is proficient in both what is beneficial and harmful. Then the wise person avoids what is harmful, takes up what is beneficial. By arriving at what is beneficial, the steadfast one is said to be wise. Okay, now we'll take up some questions. Questions that come from people on the class. And I see James. Are you unmuted? Okay.
Hi, Bhante. How are you? Thank you. So, first of all, actually, I'd like to find out where can be found those 10 kinds of speculative questions. Where can that be found? Is there a reference in the...
Actually, there are 2 famous suttas in which those questions are brought up. Both of them are in the Majjhima Nikaya, the middle-length discourses. One of them is Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 63, and that is the famous sutta. It's well known because in that sutta, a monk by the name of Malankya Putta ponders those 10 questions, and then he comes to the Buddha and asks those 10 questions to the Buddha and says, if you can answer those questions, then I will continue to live on as your disciple. But if you don't answer those questions, then I will understand that you are ignorant about them. And so then I'll think you're unworthy of my confidence, and I'll leave you and find another teacher. And then the Buddha says, I never told you when you became a monk that I would answer those questions for you. And then he goes on to use a famous simile of the poisoned arrow. He says, this is just like a man who's been hit by a poisoned arrow and he's lying on the ground. His life is ebbing away. Then his friends and relatives call a surgeon to come and remove the arrow. But the man tells the surgeon, I won't let you remove the arrow until you tell me what is the material that the arrow is made of, what is the material that the bow was made of, what kind of poison was used, what was the name of the man who hit me, what was his caste, and so on. So the Buddha says that man will die before the arrow is removed. And so the Buddha continues, he says, whether the world is eternal or not eternal and so on, there is birth, old age, sickness, and death. And that it is to remove, to put an end to birth, old age, sickness, and death that I teach the Dhamma. Yeah, so that is Majjhima Sutta number 63. And then in Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 72, a wandering ascetic comes to the Buddha and asks those questions. And then the Buddha rejects the questions, and then he explains how the Tathagata, the enlightened one, is beyond the categories of existing, not existing, both or neither after death. Yeah, so that's where you find them.
Thank you, because the simile is famous, but never paid attention to the questions
Yeah,
specifically.
those are the questions.
Thank you.
Okay, will they see?
Yes, I just have a question about when Buddha says that he prays, he doesn't praise the wrong practice.
Yeah.
Of either both. Which Majjhima Nikaya is that? When he had the talk with the Brahmin.
Yeah, that's, again, it's in the Majjhima Nikaya. It's sutta number 99.
Okay, that's my question. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Dayani?
Yes, Bante. So I'm not sure if this question fall into which type of answer.
Okay.
So yeah, this there's some question from other religion asking about the creator who create the universe,
Yeah.
the earth, the planets, and everything. How is there any explanation in the Buddha Sutta about this question, Bante?
What is the question?
If there is a creator that create the universe.
Oh, I see. I see. I think here the answer from a Buddhist perspective would be a definitive categorical no, that the universe is, from the Buddhist standpoint, is without a first creation. There's no, the Buddha says, anamatago yang bhikkhave sangsaro. The cycle of birth and death is without a beginning, without a first point.
Okay, thank you, Bante.
Yeah, but we'll see that there is an origin to the universe in the next sutta that we'll take.
Okay, thank you, Bante.
Okay, then Alvena?
Alvina here, Bante.
Yeah, I see.
So, Bante, if one is prompted to encourage a person who is asking you a question,
Yeah.
as part of their practice, to, encourage them to find the answer for themselves with reflection.
Yeah.
Are there any instances like that where the Buddha has, I don't mean the speculation part, but where he believes that the person may not be mature enough to, or may need to practice more to find the answer himself or herself? Say like a 12 or 13-year-old, I don't mean to say that a young person may not have any experience of the jhanas, but somebody who probably doesn't have the experience of the jhanas and won't understand an answer which is going to be given. Yeah. How would you tackle it? I mean, maybe the Buddha also doesn't give a clear answer for it, but how would you tackle it?
Yeah, I would say if somebody asks a question that lies beyond their range of possible experience,
right?
Yeah, I would just say that let's keep the questions practical to things that we could actually experience for ourselves. Okay. Yeah. Otherwise, some the questions about like higher stages of insight, path attainment, fruition attainment, could be just, for most people, just speculative. So let's sort of keep within this domain of what we could actually
experience,
practice, experience, and benefit from here for ourselves, here and now.
Right, because I've seen sometimes that, not in my personal experience, but I've spoken with, other students, and if a person gives an answer which may not essentially be true, but may just be addressing it at that point in time, the student who is asking goes back thinking, oh, this person is not knowledgeable enough.
Yeah.
And for no fault of theirs or no fault of the Buddha's
Yeah,
teaching.
yeah. Okay.
It just creates a false perception.
Okay. Okay. Let's move on. Next question, Priya. Priya?
Yes, hi, Bhante. My question is, when someone asks a question and then they receive the answer, however, perhaps they don't understand, but they respond with anger. How would you approach someone's anger to your answer to their question? Or do you not?
I'm trying to recall whether I've ever had an experience of somebody responding with anger to my answer to their question. I don't have any recollection of the person responding angrily to an answer to my question. Perhaps they are grumbling within their mind and angry within their mind, but I don't recall anybody displaying anger towards an answer that I've given to a question.
If it were to happen, what would you do? Or do you not address it?
Okay, if a person responded and showed anger, I would say, please settle down and let us try to discuss this matter calmly and peacefully in order to understand and not try to. Usually when a person is angry, it's because they hold to a particular point of view and they want to uphold their point of view against my point of view. So I would say, let's not get into an argument over different points of view, but let's try to, consider the matter from a neutral standpoint in order to arrive at correct understanding.
How do you get to that correct understanding then?
Yeah, that would be another issue. But I think we have to move on in the questions because I want to go on to another sutta. So let's take the other questions. Okay, Belinda.
Thank you.
Bhante, I just want to clarify something earlier when you answered someone else's question about the creator of the universe.
Yeah.
You entered your answer with, but the Buddha did say there is an origin to the universe. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
How did he explain?
We'll see that as we go along today, hopefully.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll come in the next sutta that we're going to take.
Perfect. All right, thank you.
And then Kanti, and then that will be the last question that I'll take.
Thank you, Bhante. Yes, I would like to know if there is a place in the canon where the Buddha explains how to make a question.
How to formulate a question.
Mm-hmm.
There might be, but it doesn't come immediately to mind right now. So I can't say that there isn't, but it just doesn't occur to my mind right now.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so now I want to move on to the next sutta. And so I'm skipping over some suttas and coming to the ones which require more explanation. But you should read this sutta number 43. It's also, the point is important, but it's pretty self-evident, the sutta. But I want to move on to sutta number 45. And this is very interesting and philosophically quite an important sutta. And this is called the Rohitassa Sutta. So this sutta takes place late at night when everybody else is sound asleep and the Buddha still remains awake, because it's late at night that the devas come to visit the Buddha. The deities come to ask their questions. Okay, so on this night, a young deva by the name of Rohitassa comes to the Buddha. And he asks, is it possible by traveling to know, see, or reach the end of the world where one is not born, does not grow old, does not die, does not pass away, and take rebirth? So the idea here is that as long as one is within the world, one is subject to the cycle of birth and death, repeated birth and death. But if one can travel and reach the end of the world, beyond the world system, beyond the cosmos, sort of traveling physically, geographically, one could somehow reach that end of the world, and then one will be free from the cycle of birth, old age, and death. And then the Buddha says, he says that by traveling, one cannot know, see, or reach the end of the world where one is not born, does not grow old, does not die, does not pass away, does not get reborn. Okay, then Rohitassa says, that's astounding and amazing how well that was stated by the Blessed One. Then he says that in the past, he says, I was a rishi. The rishis are the ancient Indian sages whose name was Rohitassa. And he had psychic powers so that he was able to travel through the sky, and he could travel so fast, even faster than an arrow shot by an archer. And he says that when he possessed such speed, such a large stride, the thought occurred to him that I will reach the end of the world by traveling. And so he had a long lifespan, 100 years. And then for 100 years, he traveled without stopping except to eat, to go to the toilet, and to sleep. And he kept on traveling, maybe even going at the speed of light. But he died along the way, and yet he didn't reach the end of the world. And so then he repeats the Buddha's statement, by traveling one cannot know, see, or reach the end of the world. So the important point here is that it's by traveling that one cannot reach the end of the world. The Pali word is gamanena, which means literally by going. Gamanena, by going. Okay, but now the Buddha, you see, the idea here in Rohitassa's mind, he wants to reach the place where one is no longer born, does not grow old, does not die, where one doesn't pass away and take rebirth. And he thought he could reach that by getting to the end of the world by traveling. And so the Buddha says, by traveling, one cannot reach the end of the world, where one will be free from birth, old age, and death. But he says, without having reached the end of the world, there is no making an end of suffering. So to make an end of suffering, one has to reach the end of the world. But you can't reach the end of the world by traveling, because wherever you go, there will always be more world ahead of you. And so now we're living on planet Earth. So far, we've sent a man to the moon back in 1969. Maybe in the future, we'll send a man to Mars. And at some point, we'll have colonies on Mars. Then probably, I don't know how it will be possible, but if we survive climate change and other natural disasters, long in the future, we'll find these wormholes through the spatio-temporal continuum, and we could travel to other galaxies and beyond other galaxies, super galaxies after galaxies. But wherever we travel, there'll always be the world around us. Because wherever we travel, we take our six senses with us. And it is the six senses that present the world to us. And so the Buddha says, by traveling, one cannot reach the end of the world. But unless you reach the end of the world, you cannot make an end to dukkha, to suffering. So how do you make an end of suffering? To reach the end of suffering, you have to reach the end of the world. So how do you reach the end of the world? And then the Buddha says, it is in this fathom-long body, endowed with perception and mind, that I proclaim there is the world, the origin of the world, the cessation of the world, and the way leading to the cessation of the world. Extremely profound statement. I think one of the most profoundest statements ever made in all world philosophical thought. Let us get the Pali here. Yeah, so he says, in this fathom-long body. And the word that's used for body here is not the usual word kaya, but kalabara, which it's a little denigrating. It's a little bit like using the English word carcass for the body. So this body is just a mass of flesh, and it's bhyama mate, it's a fathom high, 5.5 feet, 6 feet high. And yet it's within this body that one finds the world, the origin of the world, the cessation of the world, and the way or path leading to the cessation of the world. But not just in the body itself, not in the body alone, but it's the body with sanya, with perception, and with mana, with mind, with thought. So it's this conscious body endowed with the six sense faculties, with mind, with consciousness, that the Buddha declares one finds the world, its origin, its cessation, and the way to its cessation. And then to elaborate on this, one finds two suttas which are helpful to bring out the meaning of this particular passage. Both of them are in the Anguttara Nikaya. Okay, one is in Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 35, sutta number 116. Okay. This sutta is called Going to the End of the World. And the sutta begins with the Buddha making that statement. He makes the same statement that the end of the world cannot be known, seen, or reached by traveling. Yet, without reaching the end of the world, there is no making an end of dukkha. So the Buddha makes that statement, then he gets up from his seat and goes into his cottage, and then without explaining the meaning. And then after he leaves, the monks start raising the question, what did the Buddha mean by that very short and pithy statement? And then they ask, who can explain the meaning of that statement to us? And eventually they come to Venerable Ananda and they press Ananda for an answer. And initially Ananda tries to wiggle his way out of it, but then they keep on pressing him. And Ananda says, this is the way I understand the meaning of that short statement. He raises a question, Ananda, what is that? So he says, he says, this is the way I understand the detailed meaning of that short statement. That in the world by which one is a perceiver of the world, a conceiver of the world, this is called the world in the Noble One's discipline. So ordinarily, when we use the word world, we think of the world as being maybe the planet Earth and the things on the planet Earth. I look outside the window, I see the trees, I see the grass, I see the ground. Maybe I see some, if I look out the other window, I see a lake, I see some rocks and stones. I think that is the world, this objective world, which is here, whether I'm around or not, this world exists. But from the standpoint of the Arya Vinaya, the discipline or training of the noble ones, it is that in the world by which one is a perceiver of the world and a conceiver, a thinker of the world, that is called the world. Then Ananda says, and what is that in the world by which one is a perceiver of the world, a conceiver of the world? Then the answer he gives, the I is that in the world by which one is a perceiver of the world, a conceiver of the world. The ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind is that in the world by which one is a perceiver of the world, a conceiver of the world. So that in the world by which one is a perceiver of the world, a conceiver of the world, this is called the world in the Noble One's discipline. So probably we could say that the eye, ear, nose, tongue, and physical body are primarily the instruments of perception, and the mind is the instrument of thought, of conceiving, conceptualizing, classifying, designating, organizing, systematizing the data of perception. The five physical senses bring in the data of perception. The mind classifies, categorizes, organizes, designates, ascribes meaning to them. And so in that way, we have the meaningful world comes through perception and conception. So even I look at these words, so objectively, they are just patterns of light. But it is through the eye that I take in these patterns of light, and the eye through the retina and then the optic nerve conveys them to the brain, and then the brain, based on the patterns in the brain, the mind faculty turns these patterns of light into words. So I see the I is that in the world, and then the mind turns them into a meaningful sentence. Even at a more basic level, I look out the window and the eye takes in just patterns of light, but then the mind turns those patterns of light into trees, green with green leaves, with red leaves, the ground, and there is a little animal, a squirrel running across the lawn. So that's how we get a meaningful world, through the senses taking in data and the mind interpreting those data and constituting a world. So that is the world in the discipline of the Noble One. And then in this sutta, then the monks, after listening to Ananda, they come to the Buddha and they report Ananda's answer. And then the Buddha says that Ananda is wise, one with great wisdom. If you had asked me the meaning of this, I would have explained it to you in exactly the same way. That's the meaning, and so you should remember it. So this is the world from the perspective of the Noble One's discipline. The eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. So actually, Ananda's question, or Ananda's answer, so far has dealt just with the meaning of the world. But where do we find the origin, cessation, and way to the cessation of the world? To answer that question, we have to go to another sutta. This is also in Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 12. The collected discourses on dependent origination, in sutta number 44. So this sutta is called the world. And here the Buddha says, I will teach you the origin and the passing away of the world. Instead of the word nirodha, cessation, he uses atangama, which has basically the same meaning. Okay, so now he starts to answer, what is the origin of the world? So in dependence on the I and forms, I consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. With feeling as condition, there is craving. With craving as condition, there is clinging. With clinging as condition, there is existence. With existence as condition, there is birth. Then when there is birth, then there's old age, sickness and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure, and despair. So we could say that this is the origin of the world. And now the world is the 6 sense bases. And yet the 6 sense bases arise. They arise at birth. When we're born, we acquire the 6 sense bases. In fact, birth is defined elsewhere in the suttas as the acquiring of the 6 sense bases. So first, conception takes place. At conception, there comes into being the body base and the mind base. Gradually, the eye, ear, nose, and tongue emerge, and then we come out into the world equipped with these 6 sense bases. And those 6 sense bases are the world. But where does that world of the 6 sense bases originate? How does birth come to be? Birth comes to be because we've created the condition for new existence through our previous karma. A previous karma has disposed us to a particular realm of existence. And we've accumulated that karma through our clinging to pleasures, clinging to views. Clinging has been conditioned by craving by feeling, then going back to contact, the 6 sense bases and so forth, back to the eye and forms and contact. And what underlies craving is ignorance. So we could say that the origin of the world is ignorance and craving. And when there's ignorance and craving working together, then the contact through the 6 sense bases will give rise to feeling, which will generate more craving, more clinging, more existence, a new birth, followed by old age, sickness, and death. And so the end of the world, the cessation of the world, comes about not by traveling to the end of the world. It arises first, there comes through the 6 sense bases, there comes contact. Through contact, there comes feeling. Through feeling, we have to go to the passing away. So in dependence on the eye and forms, there's eye consciousness, then contact. Through contact, there is feeling. And with feeling as condition, there is craving. But it is with the fading away and cessation of craving that there is the cessation of clinging. With the cessation of clinging, the end of existence. With the end of existence, the cessation of birth. Then the cessation of old age, sickness, and death. So it is the cessation of craving, through the cessation of craving, that one comes to the end of birth, old age, and death. And that is the cessation of the world. And the cessation of craving comes about through the cessation of ignorance. And so the end of the world is to be reached within oneself through the cessation of craving and ignorance. And the way to the cessation of the world, the path to the cessation of the world, is the Noble Eightfold Path. through which we reach the cessation of ignorance and craving. And so first, let's finish by just taking the verses, then we'll take questions. Okay, so the verses go, the end of the world can never be reached by way of traveling. Yet without reaching the end of the world, there is no release from dukkha, from suffering. Thus, the wise one, the world knower, who has reached the world's end and lived the spiritual life, has known the end of the world. And so this world knower, this wise one, who is at peace, does not have any more craving for this world in which we're living now, or for some other world, for a world in some future life. Okay, so those are the verses, which basically just repeat the point of the sutta. Okay, let us now look at some questions. Wow, a lot of questions. Okay, will they say?
Yeah, Bhante, the term traveling, when they said if one traveling to the end can change, it means physically going from place to place, right? When the question is raised.
Yeah, that is what the intention is in that sutta, physically traveling.
Okay, thank you.
Let me call on some people who didn't ask questions in relation to the previous sutta. So, Olivia?
Thank you, Bhante, for taking my question. I just, as I listen to this, I find that there's a huge emphasis on how the world is created within each of us based on our perceptions and the way our mind works. And it connects with definitive practice in the Eightfold Path. But would I be right in saying that paramount to all of the path factors, that right effort is consistent and ongoing? Would you weigh one over the other, and specifically right effort? Thank you.
Yeah, I wouldn't weigh one path factor over the others. All of them are essential.
Okay.
Yeah, all of them are essential.
Thank you, Bhikkhu Bodhi.
Okay, Vetri.
Thank you, Bhante. So my question is regarding the origin of the world. Since the world is identified with the 6 sense bases, the 12 links of dependent origination, Nama Rupa is said to be the condition for the 6 sense bases. So is it somehow related to the origin of the world?
Wait, say, I didn't quite catch the question.
So since Nama Rupa is the condition for Salayatana, so can we Nama Rupa to be the origin of the world in some sense?
I would say in a more ultimate, I would say Nama Rupa together with Vijnana constitutes the world. So the world of experience is Vijnana, consciousness, together with Nama Rupa, with mentality, materiality. The origin of the world, probably in the most basic sense, is ignorance and craving. Particularly like craving is the active factor, the propelling factor that drives us to grasp upon, but to pushes the stream of consciousness into a new existence. And what sustains craving is ignorance, not understanding the real nature of things. And so it's when there's ignorance working together with craving that at death, the stream of consciousness moves on, grasps upon a new physical organism, and brings into being Nama Rupa. So it's Namarupa together with consciousness that constitute the world. And the originating factors, the main originating factors, are ignorance and craving. Okay, next is Vinyu.
Good morning, Bhante. I have this question regarding the AN 455. You mentioned about the Kalabhara, which is the Caucasus. Then you mentioned about the Bodhi with Mana and Sanya. I just wonder that why Buddha sometimes use Mano as a sixth consciousness and sometimes he use Mana. And in this respect, what about the SN 35116?
Wait. Let's take that the question. Why he sometimes use Mano, sometimes Mana?
Yes.
No, there's no difference. It's just that the word in Pali, actually the stem form is manas, and then in the nominative it becomes mano, and when it's combined with other words, often you get sometimes mana, but often mano. It's the same word. Okay, continue.
That's all. Yeah.
That was the question.
Yes, that was my question, because okay. I thought that manas inclusive of the emotion part, which is more of the ego and also conceit. Is that a difference with that?
Maybe you're thinking of mana.
Yes.
Oh, that's a completely different word.
Right, okay.
They just look similar. But mana is the word that we translate conceit. And it's etymologically, it's not related to mano. The word mano comes from the verbal root man, which means to think. And mana comes from the verbal root ma, which means to measure. Okay, yeah, so they're different words.
So for SN35 as well as SN12, are they mana or
No, that's we're speaking about the six senses. It's always mano, not mana.
Okay. Right. Okay. Thank you. That's all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Who did I just call on? Was that Vetri?
No, Vinu.
Oh, Vinu. Okay. So the next one is Lim King.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Bhante. I just want to ask regarding whether in the sutta or Buddha mentioned about, that the earth is where human beings live. Is there another universes where the same condition like earth, where another place where human beings also live?
There are a few texts which speak about the cosmos as consisting of many world systems. And we could presume that in those many world systems, there are beings living there like human beings. In fact, in the Mahayana Sutras, one finds much more elaborate descriptions of other world systems in which Buddhas appear with their companies of disciples and their sanghas and their communities of bodhisattvas. Yeah, so one finds that in Buddha suttas.
What about aliens? Where they categorize under which realm?
What is that?
Alien.
No, there's nothing about aliens.
No.
Okay, we move on to HDM.
Yeah, hi, Bhante.
Hi.
So am I correct in interpreting that the chain of dependent origination can be cut only at the craving link?
Well, actually, the most fundamental place that keeps the whole chain intact is ignorance. So one can't sort of directly cut craving without cutting ignorance. What one does through restraint is one prevents craving from expanding and proliferating. But then it's to cut the whole chain, one has to eliminate ignorance, and that takes place through the development of panya, or wisdom.
There's a secondary question here. There's an opinion out there that the suttas require us to stop proliferating. Physically, as in giving birth to new humans. I don't agree with that, but I wanted to submit that to you.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah, I have a scholar friend who believes that, but let's leave it aside then.
That seems to be an interpretation, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Namal?
Good morning, Bhante.
Good morning.
Thank you for taking my call. In a lot of the suttas, sometimes the Buddha and the Arahats sometimes will say, in this very mountain at the time of a previous Buddha.
Yeah.
Does that mean that we are kind of like hamsters on a wheel, going that the world kind of repeats itself in different eons? That it's the same world, maybe not physically, but
let us say that the world process goes through repetitive cycles, just like a year goes through the cycle of, we have spring, summer, autumn, winter, then we have followed by spring, summer, autumn, winter, again and again. But it doesn't mean that all of the events that take place in one year will again take place again the next year. That doesn't happen. The change of the seasons is just the stage, so to speak, for the events of our lives to take place. And so according to the Buddhist cosmology, the universe goes through these repetitive cycles of development, origination, development, deterioration, destruction, followed by a new cycle of origination, development, deterioration, destruction. But this doesn't mean that the events that take place during those cycles are just a repetition of the events that take place in earlier cycles.
Thank you, Bhante. One more quick thing. Does the world, when the Buddha explained it, equal everything conditioned and cessation equal everything unconditioned?
I think the word "the world" is used in different senses. One has to determine the sense in which it's being used.
Thank you, Bhante.
Yeah. Okay, Jia Tang. Jia Tang. Let me unmute. Jia Tang. Okay, then we go to Robin.
Thank you, Bhante.
Who's speaking?
This is Robin.
Okay, Robin, you speak. Then we get Jia Tang.
Okay, is that okay?
Yeah.
Thank you for very insightful teaching. When the sutta discusses the end of the world and how to find it, and the Buddha says you can't find it by travel to any particular place, you have to understand your senses and the mind and the way it originates. Is there a distinction to be drawn there between the purpose of the question is, as always, the end of suffering and finding of happiness, rather than some sort of what Westerners would call epistemology or metaphysics, because some of what the Buddha says seems to indicate that everything is sort of mental or in one's mind, and that there's a very respectable position that could mean to teach that, but he's not quite saying that, I don't think. It's not that he's giving an idealistic metaphysics.
Definitely not. Yeah, definitely not an idealistic metaphysics. Yeah.
as in teaching people how to, and he's not saying, for example, that the Mississippi River, that originated by somebody thinking about it, or that it wouldn't be there.
No, definitely not. No, it's not taking a standpoint of an idealistic metaphysics. I mean, the Buddha definitely avoids any kind of metaphysical commitments in that sense.
So it's more like the question about the end of the world is something about understanding oneself and the cause of suffering, rather than statements about the nature of what physical realities or what have you.
Yeah. It seems maybe the deity Rohitassa was almost working with a kind of, from a metaphysical standpoint, seeking some kind of metaphysical reality outside the scope of the apparent world as the place of liberation. He's still seeking liberation from suffering, but he seems to be seeking it on the basis of a metaphysical assumption that there's some domain physically outside this world that he could reach by traveling, whereas the Buddha is pointing inwardly to the task of overcoming ignorance and craving to reach the end of dukkha, the end of suffering.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's right. It's, I guess, with certain backgrounds, it's easy to think of it differently. Thank you.
Yeah. Did we get Tang? Did he or she want to ask the question?
Bhante, I do not have a question for you. Thank you.
Okay. Then we'll have to end the program for the day, and we'll end with the sharing of the merits. Let me get that. Okay, so we're going to share the merits with the Devas, the Nagas, the Bhutas.
Just a minute.
Okay, so I'll recite the verses, and you, on your own, you recite along with me. Akasata chabumata deva naga mehidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanang. Akasata chabumata deva naga mehidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanang. Akasata chabumata deva naga mehidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe deva anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhuta anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe sata anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Bhavag upadaya avici hetato etantare satakai upapanna rupya rupicha asanya sanino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibuting. Then you say sadhu, 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 sadhu. Okay. I want to.
Thank you very much, Bhante.
Wait. I want to end with some announcements. Yeah, I have some announcements.
Bhante.
Yeah, some announcements I have before we end. Okay, tomorrow. Well, first I want to mention that over this weekend there's taking place an event organized by an organization called the Poor People's Campaign, to shine a spotlight on poverty in the United States. This is a very grave problem. People think the United States is the wealthiest country in the world, but 40% of the US population lives either in poverty or close to the poverty line. And so there's a group of faith leaders from many different religions who have spearheaded. They had organized, originally it was to be an in-person march in Washington to call attention to the nation's leaders, to call their attention to the existence, the reality of poverty in the US. But now, because of the COVID-19, the actual physical march on Washington had to be transformed into a digital march on Washington, a kind of digital program which will highlight the reality, the existence of poverty and the effects of poverty in this country. So the program is taking place in 2-hour segments 3 times over this weekend. The first presentation was actually this morning from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m., but it will be repeated this evening from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., and then again tomorrow evening from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. And you could find the link to it by going into Google, searching for Poor People's Campaign, and that will show you the digital March on Washington, and you click on that to register and then to participate in the program. So because of that, Venerable Mangala's meditation session has been rescheduled. So tomorrow it will take place in the morning. It will take place from 10 to 11 a.m. in the morning. And then I will have the Wednesday meditation program as usual from 7 to 8 p.m. on Wednesday. So please join all of these programs. I really want to urge, especially the people living in the US who join this course, to participate in the Poor People's Campaign just by observing the presentations. There's some prominent movie stars who are also sort of contributing to that. Jane Fonda, Danny Glover, amongst others. But it's being led by the Reverend William Barber, who is sort of, in a way, you could say, the heir to the tradition of Martin Luther King, and Reverend Liz Theo Harris, who is at the Union Theological Seminary in New York City. Okay, so there's Poor People's Campaign, the Sunday and Wednesday meditation programs, and then as usual, next Saturday we will have the Dharma class from 9:30 a.m. till 11:30 a.m. Okay, so thank you all for participating, and I wish you all to keep safe and happy during the week.
Thank you very much, Bante.
Thank you, Bante.
It's your lunchtime, Bante.
Okay, so we'll end
Thank you,
now.
Bante. Sadhu, Bante.
Thank you,
Thank
Bante.
you,
Thank you, Bante. See you soon.
Thank you, Bante.
Fantastic sutta, Bante. Thank
Okay.
you.